Before the Greeks. Well, what do we mean by this? Why are the Greeks so important? Everybody's always talking about the Greeks. Well, the Greeks are very important, and really, I'm going to come at it like this. It is not as simplistic as I'm about to make it, but this is a good device to start out with. We value not just all of Greece, we mostly value the ancient Athenians. So one of the city-states, although we value them all, just not as much. And what we really mean by that is the high period in it. So when Periclean Athens is what I was going to call. So at the end of this reading, I'll give you a sculpture of Pericles. So this is when all of the big stuff happens, is when this guy ends up in charge running Athens and after he defeats the Persians, or not just him, the Spartans are involved, and some other people and some really legendary generals. Okay, but before we get there, the culture in the area. So the culture has always been a little fragmented. It's mostly seagoing. I just passed over the map that I want to do. We want to think about the larger Aegean Sea area. So here we're on the southern side of it, more in the Mediterranean. We're about to talk about this. But so this is what we're going to be concerned with. But this was the dominant cultural influence for a long, long time before a big collapse. And so it seems odd because we think, well, wow, this was so long ago. Like, what would the before times even mean for that? But that's just our perspective. So a lot of ships sailing around. So these people they're sharing the same stories that today we're going to call the Greek myths. Old civilization. Right? So is it as old as the ancient Egyptians and the Mesopotamians? No, but pretty old, right? And a lot more fragmented. And you can just look at the land, right? It's so much more fragmentation going on. One of the more famous philosophers comes from over here, like the first philosopher, one of these islands over here. Okay, kenosis. Really what we mean by all this is the palace complex and on Crete. So further south, trading civilization did not have a lot of the walls, or didn't have any walls, like we were talking about. Remember Jericho, famous for the walls, and in Mesopotamia, one of the first things they would do with the king, well, he built the walls, right, to protect us, probably from their version of the Mycenaeans coming through later on, or just the next tribe over. Did have a lot of stuff, and if you have a lot of stuff, you have to write down what it is, right? So not just for now, for future, right? So we're going to trade you this right now for we're going to get this from you in the future. And although this sounds odd, right? We tend to think that people back in the day are just trading chickens and sandals and eggs and stuff like that. It is way too complicated to deal with all those relationships, because just very quickly, what if you had their version of bird flu back in the day and a bunch of the birds die? And all of a sudden now chickens and eggs are going for astronomical amounts one year that are very different from the year before. So you have inflation, so that messes with the exchange rates, right? And that can happen in virtually anything. So think not just the animals, the crops. Maybe you couldn't get, the leather didn't work out one year very well for sandals or whatever. So it's anytime a group of people come together and stay for a long time, sort of close to each other, going to go to some version of money. Well, that's going to go with writing, right? So now if you're a cattle farmer, if you're a rancher, right, you're going to want to, you're specializing in that. So maybe you need, if you don't have all the land you need, maybe you need to contract out with a farmer for hay for the winter. Right, or something like that, some kind of future exchange, right? Futures market, what we would now call a commodities market. So you need to write down the basic transfer there. This is, and we mean a really basic market here. This is nothing like now where you can go completely own commodities in the abstract sense without ever taking a delivery on any of this stuff and just speculating. Like, what do you think it's going to go up or not? Nothing like that didn't exist at the time. Okay, so big commercial center is what that's saying. Minoan ships all over the place, including ancient Egypt. Crete it had also had very good wine and olive oil. We're going to talk about that in a minute with the ancient Athenians, where everybody seems to really want to get to and talk about. But they also had good wool, so that's important. Remember, textile is still very important back in the day. And they needed to get these, and the grains. I'm going to hit that point in just a second with the Athenians, because it's easier to talk about with Athens and Sparta. Okay, so fragmented land is going to be the theme here. They start declining here, but before, with the eruption of the volcano, this is probably Atlantis, like the myth of Atlantis. This is what scholars think anyway. So again, no one's for sure. Maybe it turns out to be something else, but the philosopher Plato got the story of Atlantis and put it in one of his works. Probably got it from the ancient Egyptians. So he's relaying it. I don't know how many hands down the road, but that's where we tend to get the story first in Western civilization, is from Plato. And this is their best guess anyway about what it comes. It just changed over the years. But the Minoans probably had indoor toilets, believe it or not. So and so remember, no power back in the day, so there's no pumps to keep the pressure on the water. It has to deal with the way they moved water around the ancient world that the Romans are going to perfect several hundred years from now, is using natural streams, natural sources of water, and controlling it through pipes. Right? And so if you want to increase the pressure, hopefully you're starting at a higher elevation originally, right? And you send it into smaller and smaller pipes, little bit at a time, and that you get the pressure that you need. In other words, so their toilets would have to go all the time, because how would you stop them, and so on. Mycenaeans. All right, so beginning about around this time, very warlike people came out of the Alps. They go there. This is all over the world. And they're going to end up sort of stopping through here. So when we're talking about the ancient Athenians, this is on the side of it where they have already settled down. They've married into and have mixed with the population and made it, let's say, a little bit more aggressive. Right? So we're not to the ancient Athenians, of course, yet, because we're still way back here. But we're going to keep that in mind, because the Athenians and the Spartans both are really aggressive. We like to talk about the Athenians for all the high philosophy and ideas and some of the other things I'm about to mention. But never forget that it was the Athenians who decided they did a preemptive war against Sparta later on. And you would think, well, that's stupid, because everybody knows that the Spartans are the best fighters in the ancient world. And they were for a time. But the Athenians thought that they had a better strategy to take them, and that they were too much of a threat. So huge amount of aggression there. All right, chaos in the Eastern Mediterranean. All we're really getting to here is this world of the Iliad and Odyssey that, again, is precedes Plato by several hundred years, that Plato is really contentious about. Plato himself does not think that using stories out of the Iliad and Odyssey is a great way to teach the youth of Athens at the time. And so Plato has a real beef against Homer, but it's so popular. It's so in the region at the time. And most of these stories were circulated orally, played by musicians, much like you see in some shows at times. And then probably Homer was an individual author who wrote down a series of these things that turned into the Iliad and the Odyssey. Okay, so now we're getting to what they really want to talk about. The polis, the city-state. So instead of a king, it had a whole bunch of cities. And so much more fragmented. Not Sargon is running everything, or not whoever the pharaoh is in Egypt, but you got somebody's running Athens, somebody's running Sparta, you've got somebody else running Thebes back in the day, or whatever the city-state was. It started out as one person, and then we're going to see in Athens turned into a democracy after a while. Athens had a series of people that would run Athens. before all this, before they started electing people. Sparta, fertile region. So now we're going to talk about the grain stuff. So Sparta has good land, good rich land. It's good for staple annual grain. So think wheat, barley, rye, hops, stuff like that. Sparta, so you want to control it. So it seemed to make, or they wanted to control it anyway, so it seemed to make the Spartans like a lot more military oriented, right? If you've got the good stuff, you need to protect the good stuff. That's how the thinking goes anyway. Whereas Athens, and it was talking about before on Crete here, it much more fragmented land. So you didn't tend to have the fields as much, the really rich fields, as you had sections of land that were, say, elevated and then would fall off and be, a lot more fragmented situation. So what, not the people of Athens, but their ancestor, like way before them, decided to grow olive trees. And this was, so they were there naturally, don't get me wrong. But then over time, they're cultivating this region to where they have, that's their claim to fame. Well, why would they do that, right? They really, it seems like you would want more staple annual grains, right? Well, olive oil was extremely important in the ancient world. It was people did essentially everything with olive oil. So besides all the, it today is a food source, everybody does. But you'd burn lamps with it at different grades of the oil. So it was their fuel, right? So their oil. So in the literal sense of a natural oil here that nature made, but it was their version of like a kerosene lamp. They didn't have kerosene, but they did have olive oil, and you could burn that, right, with the right kind of wick. And that's, if you go to the Dallas Museum of Art, you can see plenty, or just about any of the museums around here. If you go in the ancient section, that's one of the sort of the commonalities you'll see is an ancient lamp. What's olive oil that's burning the lamp. Use olive oil to clean you. You've probably seen this in the movies at the time. There's with the exception of some parts of Crete back in the day, there's not the running water indoors. You have some public baths. All right, the Romans are going to perfect these down in the day, but a lot of times people would have to clean themselves with olive oil, and you think, well, my God, that sounds disgusting. How would that happen? And in the movies, you'll see this sometimes where people, at the end of a dusty day, if it's a movie set in this area, they'll kind of brush themselves down with olive oil after they have a whole lot of dirt on them, and then they'll scrape it with it's a dull thing that they're scraping with. It's kind of something that looks like a small scythe, so a curved blade that would cut wheat or something like that. But this is not for cutting, and it's dull, and you press. So along all through your arm, the olive oil would go in and it would grab the dirt, right? And then you can press use the olive oil as a way to carry the dirt out of your body, right, and onto the ground in this case. So that's all sorts of other stuff. Olive oil are really important, and everybody likes wine, of course. So they had these two crops. Right, so Athenian olive oil and Athenian wine was highly valued. It was high quality, so they end up trading for it. So they are trading at times with the Spartans when the Spartans have excess capacity. But everybody knows that it's the ancient Egyptians and some of the other places down here who have the real stores of staple annual grains. So they like going down there and trading with them. And so if you only have a crop or two that you're trading, you got to be pretty open and pretty friendly. You got to be, hey, I'm here to do business, right? So that's what people will say who study the ancient Athens, the Athenians. This is what sets the stage for a lot of the ideas that we're going to talk about, is that they came up in a different economy than some of the other economies like Sparta around here. So Sparta more closed, Athens more open. That's the big economic hullabaloo about why some people think that is. Okay, so we're back to Pericles here. We're going to pick this up in the next screencast. Pericles is really important, but while we're here, if you're hunting for a topic, Pericles is always a good topic. And his consort that we're going to talk to. Pericles was very odd as an ancient Athenians in that his his number one woman, I guess I would say people would describe it at the end of the day. He would bring her into meetings, and it really freaked the ancient Greek people out, especially when diplomats and someone came in, because he would let her talk and have her voice. So people will make a big deal about that.